Tonight we'll drift through 6 simple dishes, each one a quiet comfort from a kitchen past. Some came from seaside cafes, others from humble staff rooms or early morning bakeries, but all of them in their own way are soft steps toward rest. So settle in, breathe deeply, and let the warmth of familiar flavors guide you gently towards sleep. The first recipe tonight is soft polenta with butter and parmesan in a quiet kitchen tucked into the olive-covered hills of Umbria. I once watched a woman stir polenta for over an hour with one hand, while holding her grandson in the other. The baby was calm, asleep against her shoulder, and the spoon moved slowly, round and round in wide, steady arcs, like she was turning the wheel of time itself. The kitchen smelled faintly of wood smoke and milk, and outside the sun was setting in long golden slants across the tiled floor. She was the mother of the chef I had come to learn from, but in truth, she taught me more than he ever could. She didn't speak much English, and I spoke hardly any Italian, but she said this to me one evening, in a soft, sure voice: "You don't make polenta, you wait for it to become itself." Then she gave a little nod, as if that explained everything, and somehow it did. She'd start by bringing water to a gentle simmer in a copper pot that looked as though it had served generations. Not boiling, just simmering. She believed everything started with patience. Then she'd slowly, almost lazily, pour in the cornmeal. Not all at once, just a trickle at a time, letting it rain down through her fingers, while her other hand kept stirring, never pausing. If she saw a lump forming, she'd gently coax it apart with the back of the spoon. Never in a hurry, never harsh. The stirring was the key. She insisted not to rush it, not to walk away. She didn't use a timer. She listened to the polenta. "It speaks," she once whispered to me with a smile. "At first it's coarse, sharp, then it softens. You feel it surrender." And I began to notice it too. The grain giving way, thickening, smoothing out, slowly transforming under the rhythm of her hand. As the polenta thickened, she'd lower the heat, then fold in a knob of butter, unsalted, always. She said salt should come from the cheese, and the butter should simply soothe. The spoon turned golden as the fat melted into the grains, and the scent that rose was warm, almost like toasted bread and cream. After the butter came the cheese, parmesan finely grated, folded in with the quiet reverence of someone tucking in a sleeping child. It didn't need much, just enough to make it shine. She served it in bowls warmed by the hearth, and when the first spoonful passed my lips, it was like silence, comforting, soft, unspoken. The kind of food that doesn't shout or surprise. It simply settles beside you, asking nothing. We ate it slowly, in the hush of the evening. No music, no talking, just the sound of the spoon against the bowl and the occasional soft breath of the baby in her arms. She didn't eat quickly either. She savored each bite like she was reading a well-loved poem. The polenta held a heat that lingered, and every so often a strand of cheese would pull away, like sunlight stretching through morning mist. Since then, I've made polenta in many kitchens, in loud cities and quiet homes. I've stirred it with impatience and burned it once or twice, trying to force it along. But when I slow down, when I remember her hands, her voice, her quiet patience, it always turns out better. Tonight, if you need something that doesn't ask for words or effort, just warmth and stillness, this dish will meet you there. Bring water to a simmer. Let your cornmeal fall slowly, like evening rain. Stir without hurry. Add butter, like a kindness. Parmesan, like a memory. And wait, it will become itself. And so might you. Let this warmth settle in. Let the hush return. Let the night gather softly around your shoulders. Good night, and sleep deeply. That was recipe 1. The second recipe tonight is toast soldiers with soft-boiled egg at boarding school. When everything felt too loud or too empty, these simple tastes were a lifeline. I still remember how, on chilly mornings before breakfast, a group of us would gather around the shared table in the mess hall. One boy, bright-eyed, even in sleep-deprived haze, always described the soft-boiled egg's yolk as liquid sun. We'd sit in that cold, creaking dining room and learn a kind of unspoken urgency. In that place, you learned to dip quickly. If you hesitated, someone else would claim your share. It started with humble ingredients. The day would begin with a slice of sturdy, slightly stale white bread, enough to stand up to the brisk morning air, yet soft enough to be embraced by warmth. We'd split that bread carefully, not with a knife, but often with a gentle tug that opened up the airy interior, revealing a landscape of tiny craters, perfect nooks to be filled. Then came the egg, soft-boiled exactly as you'd learned from a trusted cook who had a knack for timing, long before digital watches and timers. The eggs would be simmered in barely a whisper of boiling water until the whites were set, but the yolk still dripped with that liquid sun, warm and radiant. Peeling was done in the back of the dormitory kitchen, quickly and with a bit of friendly rivalry. We learned that if you hesitated too long at the table, you'd watch as someone else dipped theirs and stole your moment. Once the egg was prepared, it was split right down the middle. The halves were placed gently over the soft, waiting toast soldiers, arranged in neat rows on small trays. The rules were simple. Take a bite quickly, yet delicately. Dip the toast into the golden yolk and let the rich, unspoken flavor fill you with warmth and hope. There was an art to it, a balance between grabbing the toast firmly enough that it wouldn't break, but not so hard that you lost the soft edge. In that shared moment, the clamor of youth and the competitive scramble were replaced by a quiet communion. The toast, browned just enough on its edges by a well-worn toaster, carried the memory of early mornings spent huddled in a dining room that felt both confining and strangely full of possibility. Each soldier, dipped in the radiant yolk, was a small act of defiance against the harshness of the day, a reminder that even the smallest comforts could spark joy. I recall that sometimes, after the rush, we'd sit together, huddled around a table in a drafty corner, nibbling our toast soldiers and laughing softly about the day's trials. It wasn't a fancy meal, nor was it planned with precision. It was raw and spontaneous, and a slice of life in its simplest form. The combination was more than food. It was a ritual that taught us to act quickly, savor deeply, and appreciate the fleeting warmth of shared moments. Years have passed since those days, but that memory remains etched in my mind. Now, whenever I find myself in need of a small comfort or a reminder to seize the present, I prepare soft-boiled eggs with toast soldiers. I wake the egg gently, allowing its warmth to last a moment longer than necessary. I toast the bread until it has just the right edge, crispy but still yielding the soft interior, and I dip it into a yolk that glows like the morning sun. With each bite, I remember the urgency and the tender camaraderie of those early school days, where something as simple as a shared breakfast could mean the difference between feeling lost and finding hope. It reminds me that sometimes, even in the most hurried moments, there is beauty to be found, a gentle lesson in seizing what is given and letting it nourish you, if only for a moment. So tonight, if you feel the pull of a memory or the need for a small comforting pause, prepare your own toast soldiers with a soft-boiled egg. Let the yolk shine like liquid sun. Dip quickly, savor slowly, and carry that shared warmth into your dreams. Good night, and may your sleep be filled with the gentle glow of treasured moments. That was recipe 2. The third recipe tonight is coconut rice with cinnamon and a bit of maple. There was a Trinidadian sous chef I worked with for a short while in London. Sharp, intuitive, and calm under pressure. Her name was Loan. She rarely spoke unless it mattered, and her hands moved like someone raised in kitchens long before stainless steel and timers. But every Sunday, like clockwork, she'd make a dish that didn't come from any menu. Coconut rice, spiced with cinnamon and sweetened just slightly with maple. It was never for the guests, just for the staff. She called it childhood in a pot, said it reminded her of quiet afternoons back in Trinidad, when the scent of sweet rice would drift from the stovetop and carry through the window screens. This isn't rice for rushing, she'd warn, gently shaking the pot. It's rice that needs remembering. She'd begin with long grain rice, washed carefully, always rinsed until the water ran clear. Then the coconut milk, poured slow and unhurried from a dented tin she'd insist on opening herself. It was never the light stuff. If you're going to comfort someone, she'd say, don't hold back. Into the pot went a pinch of salt, a pat of butter, and then the cinnamon, ground fresh from thick bark she kept wrapped in brown paper. It was different from the pre-packed spice jars. This cinnamon had backbone, earthy, deep, with a hint of warmth that filled the kitchen air long before the rice was done. She always stirred it with the same wooden spoon, the one with the burn mark near the handle, the one that had outlived 3 restaurants and countless chefs. You don't make good food, she once whispered, as the rice began to simmer, unless something old helps carry it. As it cooked, the rice would swell and soften, thickening with the creaminess of the coconut milk. Steam clouded the windows. You could hear the bubbling under the lid, soft and low, like a lullaby being hummed behind a closed door. She never lifted the lid early. That was her rule. Rice will tell you when it's ready, not the other way around. Only at the end would she stir in a bit of real maple syrup, just a drizzle, enough to coat it in gold, not drown it. Sweet's a memory, she'd say, not a flood. We'd gather in the back of the kitchen, around the biggest mixing bowl she could find, each of us holding mismatched spoons and cups. There was no plating, no garnish, just the warmth of coconut, the hush of cinnamon, and the kind of sweetness that didn't demand anything from you. It was hard to explain, but that rice made Sundays feel like exhale, like closing your eyes and letting go of the shift, the orders, the noise. With each bite, it was as if the air around us slowed, conversations softened, jokes felt gentler. We didn't talk much while eating it. You didn't need to. The rice was the conversation, and when the bowl was scraped clean and the shift loomed again, there was something different in the room, a kind of ease, a knowing comfort that whatever the day held, someone had remembered you with rice and maple and care. Now when I make coconut rice at night, especially on Sundays, I follow her rhythm. I use the full fat coconut milk. I rinse the rice until it runs clear. I stir slow and wait until the steam smells like memory. I add cinnamon from bark, not bottles, and just before serving, I drizzle the maple in a thin golden line. I eat it quietly, usually by a window. I think of Loan, of her spoon, her patience, her story wrapped in every grain. I let the warmth settle in, the sweetness speak softly, and I breathe in a childhood I never lived, but somehow still feel. If your night calls for something gentle, something that reminds you of being cared for without having to ask, make this. Coconut rice with cinnamon and a bit of maple. And as the steam rises, let it tell you, you don't have to rush rice or yourself when the day is over. Sleep soft, sleep full. Good night. That was recipe 3, good night. The 4th recipe tonight is warm pear with cinnamon and crushed walnuts. There was a French pastry cook I shadowed for just a season in the Loire Valley. She was quiet in the way that only deeply confident people are. She had a way of handling fruit that felt almost ceremonial, like each pear or plum had a soul that needed gentleness. At night, after the kitchen had been cleaned down to its tiles, she would choose a single pear and say, pears sleep better if you give them spice and a place to sink into. Then she'd roast it, just for herself. I watched her do it a dozen times, never rushed, never skipped. It wasn't a performance, it was a ritual. She'd select a pear that was ripe, but not bruised. Soft, she'd murmur, but still with a little memory of the tree. She would peel it slowly with a paring knife that looked like it had 100 stories, and halve it from stem to base in one clean motion. The core was scooped with a small spoon, leaving behind a perfect cradle, as if the fruit had been designed just to hold warmth. She'd melt a knob of butter in a small ceramic dish, brushing it across the cut sides of the pear with quiet precision. Then came the cinnamon, a generous pinch from a clay jar she kept above the stove. Not sprinkled, but rubbed gently into the flesh, like tucking a child into bed. Sometimes she'd add a tiny trickle of honey, sometimes not. The pear will say what it needs, she said once, without looking up. Into a warm oven it went, never hot. Low and slow was her way. Let the sweetness wake up without panic. And while it roasted, the kitchen would fill with a scent so comforting, it felt like being wrapped in an old wool blanket. When the pear was soft enough to be nudged with a spoon, she'd scatter crushed walnuts into the hollow where the seeds once were. No sugar, no cream, just the earthiness of the nuts meeting the caramel warmth of the pear. The contrast was enough. She'd eat it straight from the dish, standing at the edge of the counter, her apron still on, hair tucked behind her ears. Sometimes when she shared, she'd cut small pieces onto a saucer and pass it to me with no words. Just a nod, and I understood. This wasn't about hunger, it was about softness, about winding down, without explanation, about fruit, heat, and the quiet generosity of spice. Now when I feel the day hanging on me like too much coat, I make warm pear with cinnamon and walnuts. I don't rush, I choose the fruit carefully. I peel, I core, I brush with butter, and I wait. I let the oven do its slow alchemy. I listen to the silence as it cooks. And when it's ready, tender and sweet with a blush of spice, I take a spoon and find the softest part, where the pear sinks into itself and the walnuts rest like pebbles in a stream. Some nights I eat it in bed, some nights by the window, always slowly, always with the lights low. Because like she said, pears and people too sleep better when you give them spice and a place to sink into. So if the world feels loud tonight, or the day left a bit of weight behind, find a pear, warm it gently, add spice, let it cradle your evening. And as the scent rises and the sweetness blooms, let your breath match its softness. Sleep easy, sleep spiced. Good night. That was recipe 4. The 5th recipe tonight is golden toast, with marmalade and sea salt. My father wasn't a cook. In fact, I don't think he ever followed a recipe in his life. But he had one ritual he never missed. Not once, even on the longest days. Every night, after the dishes were done, and the house had hushed, he made toast. He always used the same loaf, not fancy, not fresh from any artisan bakery, just a modest white sandwich bread. He preferred slightly stale. It holds the burn better, he'd say with a wry smile, placing a slice into the toaster with a practiced hand. I remember how he'd stand at the kitchen counter, barefoot, staring out the window into the dark yard. No music, no TV in the background, just the quiet hum of the fridge and the faint tick of the old toaster. When it popped, he never hesitated. He liked it, golden at the edges, darker in the middle, just shy of burnt, though sometimes he let it tip over into charcoal territory. He'd say, "Bittersweet is best before bed," like it was a proverb passed down through generations, though I'm sure it was just his own invention. He used marmalade, not the sweet, soft kind, but the sharp one, thick with orange peel and a bite of rind. He'd spoon it out slowly, layering it over the toast, like he was patching something up. Then came the sea salt, a pinch between his fingers, dropped gently like rain over a wet roof. No butter, no knife, just toast, marmalade, and salt, always the same. We didn't speak much during those late night rituals, but sometimes I'd wander into the kitchen, restless, pretending I needed water, or had forgotten something. He'd glance up, toast in hand, and tear off a piece to offer me. Never the first bite, always the corner. That small, uneven square felt like a quiet invitation to be present, to accept the day as it was, not as I wished it had gone, and it always tasted the same. Warm, slightly bitter, bright with citrus, the salt nudging every flavor into focus. It wasn't a comfort food in the usual sense. It was something else. A punctuation mark at the end of the day. A way to say, that's enough now. These days I find myself craving it on nights, when I've read too many headlines, or when the to-do list echoes louder than it should. I reach for bread, nothing special. I toast it dark. I spoon out marmalade, the kind that bites back a little, and I finish it with sea salt, remembering the way he'd tapped the counter with his fingers afterward. A little rhythm that said all done now. And in that moment, the kitchen seemed quiet. And I understand something deeper. Not all recipes need ingredients. Some just need memory. So if you're carrying the weight of a noisy world tonight, if your thoughts are tangled and your shoulders tight, make toast. Burn it a little. Just enough. Add something bitter, something bright. And then the salt. Let it all sit together, unhurried. Take a bite, close your eyes, and let the day go. Let the toast finish the sentence. Sleep well. That was recipe 5. Good night. The 6th recipe tonight is semolina pudding with a dot of strawberry jam. At boarding school, food was often more function than feeling. Trays clattered, spoons scraped, and meals passed without much ceremony. But once, just once, the semolina pudding was different. It was the work of a retired matron called in to cover a kitchen illness. No one expected much, just the usual ladle of lukewarm starch. But what she made that day hushed even the loudest tables. She moved slowly, with the ease of someone who'd cooked more meals than she could count, hand steady and sure. She said very little, humming softly as she stirred. The milk was warm, not scalded. She poured it into the pot like she was pouring tea for someone who mattered. The semolina went in by feel, not by scale, raining down in a slow, steady stream. Then came sugar, a bit of vanilla, and the tiniest pinch of salt, stirred until the mixture thickened to the consistency of a whisper. She never rushed it. Soft food restores the soul, she said once to no one in particular, just over her shoulder, as if repeating something she'd always known. And somehow you believed her. When it came time to serve, she didn't dump it into bowls. She spooned it gently, smoothing the tops with the back of the ladle. And then, just before handing each portion across the counter, she pressed a single dot of strawberry jam into the center, right in the middle, like a jewel. No swirls, no mess, just a bright red pause in a sea of pale gold. We sat in silence that day. No one said much. The pudding was warm, smooth, a little sweet, and the jam melted slightly at the edges. It was comfort, pure and simple, and it stayed with you. You felt it in your stomach, in your chest, like someone had looked at your hunger, your tiredness, your quiet need, and answered with gentleness. Years later, I tried making it again. I was in a small kitchen with a single burner and a chipped saucepan. I stirred slowly, patiently. Milk, semolina, sugar, salt. I spooned it into a bowl and added the jam, just one small spoonful in the middle. And suddenly, I wasn't just making dessert. I was remembering what it felt like to be cared for without question. So if the day's been rough or the world too loud, make semolina pudding. Stir with care. Let it thicken gently. Let it soothe you. Add a dot of jam, not too much, just enough to remind you that kindness, like sweetness, is best offered in small, honest amounts. Eat it slowly. Let it warm you from the inside, and know that softness, however small, has the power to restore. Sleep deeply tonight. Let the comfort carry you. That was recipe 6. Good night. The 7th recipe tonight is warm chamomile orange tea with a drop of honey. There was a quiet flat in Bath I stayed in during my early 20s, the kind of place with fogged windows, creaky floorboards, and a kettle that clicked just before it boiled. My friend lived there with her grandmother, a soft-spoken woman who moved like she'd never been in a hurry her whole life. Every night, just as the sky began to turn that velvety shade of navy, she'd begin her ritual. No announcement, no invitation, just the rustle of dried herbs, the scrape of orange peel, and the hum of something ancient settling in the air. She used loose chamomile, never bags. The bags forget the flower, she'd joke with a smile, lifting pinches of soft yellow blossoms into a waiting teapot. Then she'd curl a strip of orange peel, zest more than pith, taken fresh or dried, depending on the season. She'd crush it just slightly before it joined the flowers, releasing an oil that smelled like sunlight in winter. Then came the pour, boiling water, but not quite roaring, always left to settle for a moment. It flowed over the mixture, blooming the chamomile into a golden cloud, the orange oil dancing on the surface like soft light. She'd cover it with a tea cloth and let it sit. Steeping is not waiting, she'd say, it's listening. When it was ready, she'd strain it slowly into mismatched mugs. No ceremony, but never carelessness. Into each, she'd stir a single drop of honey, barely enough to sweeten, just enough to smooth. She claimed honey shouldn't shout, it should hum. We'd sit near the foggy windows, holding the cups between both hands. The warmth was immediate, not just in your fingers, but in your chest. The taste was delicate, floral, citrus, a touch earthy from the stems, not overpowering, just present. And something about it changed things. The room felt softer, the clocks felt slower. It wasn't about the tea, really. It was about the signal it sent to the body, to the mind, that things were finished now, that nothing more was needed, that sleep could be welcomed, not earned. I still make it sometimes. When I've worked too late, when my thoughts refuse to quiet, I steep the flowers, peel the orange, let the steam curl up into the quiet of the night. I remember her, calm in her chair, holding the warmth in her palms, whispering, "It's okay to slow down now. So if tonight you need a moment, a breath, a pause, let this be it." Let the chamomile speak softly. Let the orange remind you of sunlit things, and let the honey hum. Drink slowly, sleep soon. The day has done enough, and so have you. That was recipe 7. Good night. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep.